welcome to UIC's video podcast. My name is Boris Kovich, and today we have with us Tom Kovach, who is the founder and president of UIC Inc. How are you, Tom?
I'm great, thanks, Boris.
All right, so when we decided to do this podcast, we thought about what items to talk about, the hot button items that we get asked a lot of questions for from our clients, from prospects, and folks in general who are just interested in insurance. And one of the topics that always comes up is cyber liability. Everything that we see in the news today, from large breaches of Equifax, Sony, Target, we have, as a society, a large concern about protecting our data, both as consumers and as corporations. And so I wanted to talk about all the aspects that entail cyber liability, cyber security, and insurance that revolves around it. So what I wanted to talk today, Tom, is the policies themselves, what are the specifics and how coverage is provided for these companies, the industry and how it's changing and morphing, and then just everything that entails. How does it sound?
Well, that sounds great. It's a pretty open canvas to paint on, and frankly, it's a area where all of the boards that meet, it's a number one subject that pops, and first question you get is, do we have cyber coverage? And the answer generally is yes, although...
What does it really cover?
Although the question then becomes, what does it really cover? And more importantly, what are companies doing to protect themselves? Because in point of fact, insurance is your last safeguard. By that time, you have the issue.
Sure.
So from our standpoint, as a consulting firm in risk management, the first area we discuss is how to prevent the claim from happening, and that entails, in many cases, how to change culture within companies, because most...
How employees treat, that's what you're talking about?
Correct.
Okay.
How employees treat data, because all of the science in the world, all of the firewalls, encryption, etc., are great, and they're terrific. But if you're, as the old saying goes, you're only as good as your weakest link, and in many cases, the weakest link is your employees if they are not following the protocol set down by the company.
Well,
that's the first area. But when we get into the more technical, which is all right, after we've done all of that, no one is immune to being either hacked or having their information in some way leaked.
By its nature.
By accidents. Yeah. By its nature, technology is moving faster, and the exposure exists. So the insurance industry has come up with cyber insurance products, which will take that risk away, subject to the policy language and exclusions. And so to just start with the basics of that is insurance policies have two areas of the coverage. One is they cover third-party liability, that which you're responsible for or become liable for, that you didn't keep someone else's data secure. And they also have first-party coverage, which will pay you as the client or the company for damages which you incur because of your assets being diminished and costs that you have to spend, such as forensic costs, recovery costs, business interruption, loss of earnings, and something that a lot of people don't pay enough attention to is the reputational damage which occurs, all of which, if you can engineer the policy correctly, will pick those up.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the specifics of how a policy is constructed and what are some of the, let's say, issues that people, when they come and they ask us for advice, what we see with their policy. right? So take, for example, the first party versus third party coverages. And I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding, right, between what folks perceive that they are covered for and what's actually within a policy, both in terms of the coverages and what limits are provided. So you see a company that has a $2 million policy for cybersecurity or cyber liability. Oftentimes, on the first party side, those limits are actually reduced or sublimited, right? And so there are coverages that are provided, but they aren't to the full policy limits. And they are oftentimes just as important as the cyber liability aspect, the third party aspect of a policy, right?
Well, just, I don't know if there was a question in there, but let me...
We'll expand.
Let me try to put that into a more focused area. As in all procurement of in this case, an insurance policy for this exposure, you need to understand first what your exposure is. So what we find is when we're called in, and oftentimes it may be after a claim has occurred and that particular client has not received the amount of monies that they thought they would from their insurance policy,
exactly,
or the right protection, then you often find when you're dealing with it and you're looking at the insurance, there's generally a communication gap occurred. One is between the insurer, broker, and the client as to, well, what the client thought was being covered,
sure,
and what was sold to them via the broker and or through the insurance contract. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was a misrepresentation. It's often that there's not enough understanding or questions being asked of all of the parties so that they're all on the same page. You're quite correct in the beginning of your comment, which is oftentimes we'll call in and the client will say, oh, well, I have a $2 million limit. Why did my policy only pay $100,000 for business interruption, for my loss of earnings? Or why did it only pay $500,000 for my fines and penalties, or no coverage for fines and penalties? And the facts are that, as in all negotiations, the client either didn't understand enough about the product that they were buying, therefore they didn't ask the right questions or didn't have the right expertise. The brokerage firm or the insurer sold them their product, which they thought, what they had.
Sure.
And when the marriage happened, everybody was originally happy. But when the loss occurs, and everybody digs deeper into it, the policy was not constructed in a manuscripted form.
It was kind of off the shelf.
Well, it was either off the shelf or the exposures were not transferred in the manner in which they should have been. And that takes a great deal of time, knowledge, and energy. And a lot of that is why clients hire an independent firm such as us to help them. However, having said that, if you understand your exposures and you're able to convey them properly, you usually will end up with a much better product that the insurer and or broker will be able to get from it. On the other hand, there is a lack of, or there's a significant differentiation between the various products that are out there that oftentimes the brokerage firm that's being relied upon to understand all of these just simply doesn't have that, wherewithal, and you need to, seek alternate advice, just like you would go to an accountant for accounting questions or a lawyer for legal questions. There's independent advisors such as us and others that can provide that type of guidance and not involved in the sale of the product.
That's actually a very good point that you brought up. Is there is a lot of differentiation between different products that are put out there. Because it's such a new coverage, there's no uniformity to these forms that each one of these insurers puts out.
Well, that's correct. I mean, there is no standard.
It's not like a GL, right?
There's no standardization, and we've often, I think the industry would go a long way in at least creating a baseline of cover in which everyone who buys a policy will understand that they are going to get this baseline. Right. I'm probably going to show my age here, but it's sort of like the 169 lines in a standard property policy, which no matter what, you're getting those standard, coverages. Now, of course, there's, clearly much more enhancements on that,
all the bells and whistles.
All bells, whistles, and customization, and so on. But even in the way that applications are completed today, you would think that for cyber coverage, which is pretty much based around technology, that you'd be filling out an application, off of your computer and be able to send it in. You would, but they're still in a paper world where you're filling out
kind of
applications.
Antiquated insurance.
It's a little antiquated, and also, I do now see the industry. We just attended the conference in Austin, where we were able to witness that some insurers now are actually going to be able, if you allow them within the application itself, by the answers that you're giving, be able to test your
like a breach
validity,
test.
the type of protections that you actually have, so that a good deal of this can be, automated, which will give comfort to the underwriters, the insurance companies. Therefore, coverage can be broadened, policy costings could, potentially drop. I may be getting a little ahead of myself at this point, but in general, there is a lot of good things that are happening in the area, but you need to know, as always, how to ask for it, how to present it, to make sure that you're going to receive that transfer that you're going to be paying premium for.
Well, let's just briefly touch upon that. So when someone goes and they're applying for insurance cover for cyber liability specifically, is there any sort of tips, tricks, hints, anything along those lines of how to properly present their information to underwriters in order to get the best possible coverage and premium?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, you need to, explain how your security of, first off, you need to explain what kind of data you keep. Some firms keep a tremendous amount of personal identifiable information. Others keep very, very little. So therefore, their exposure in
or they can keep a lot of records, but it's such limited information that it's really, for it to be compromised, the majority of it can even be found online.
Unfortunately, in that regard, the law has been so broad that it's, almost as if you even have their, their name, their position in the company, and so on, that's deemed to be personal information in some places. So the fact is that you have to look at it from a broad point of view. Even though you may have a lot of information, it doesn't, or personal identifiable information, it may not be in an area which has any real use,
Right.
if you will, right? So you as a target is quite low. In addition to that, no matter what, how are you securing it? What is all of the, let's call it the physical, for lack of a better term, way you're securing that data? Kind of firewalls, encryption, all of it.
Contractually, right? If it's going to a third party?
Contractually, if you're sending it to third party processors and all of that, that needs to be presented properly, right? So you put your best foot forward and you go through that, and a lot of times the IT department's going to provide you with all that technical. However, you also need, since insurers are becoming very sophisticated in understanding that all of the technical is great, but what do you do as a company in terms of education of your employees on how to secure data on your daily basis, not to take flash drives home, not to take computers unencrypted or secure out of the facility. And many companies today don't even have drives that are any drive on the computer. So there's no way you can download
It's all cloud-based or
everything. So there's all kinds of things that you can do, but they're going to be interested in, if you have a culture that's very good, you would express that as well. So all of that goes into the package. Now, I would also say, don't get stuck in the lines of the application, because many times the application, just like if you were in, companies fill out business interruption applications, right? The insurance company produces a form, they complete the form, but that form really doesn't present the true exposure.
Sure.
And a simple example of that is the form will say, well, how much is your revenue? What's your cost of goods sold?
How much
how much profit, and how much profit did you make for the year? Do you have payroll and so on? And in the end, there's a bottom number that you should be insuring for. Except the key question in that is, if you had two factories that were both producing the same item, they were both in different parts of the country, and they were both at half capacity, if one went down, the other one would pick up all of the slack.
Mitigation
So
aspect
therefore,
of it.
you really don't have a business interruption exposure. You may have a small extra expense. Yet, in filling out that application, if you didn't think that through, you would have one big number you'd be paying premium for, which you would never receive. The same is true.
That's something we're going to talk about in our property podcast.
Right. So the same is true when you're filling out an application for cyber. If you can put things on that application which are beyond what the application is asking for, which puts your company in a far better light and so on,
Sure.
You should do so. And we have a number of clients where, in point of fact, due to the nature of their business, the application was completely not able to capture either their exposure or the integrity of how they defend the data that they had. So we literally spoke to the insurer and said, we're going to give you our information in a format which we think will explain our risk far better in our prevention and loss prevention in our culture and so on.
And what was the result of that?
And the result was, previously when they had completed an application in the way it was, they had a premium that was significantly high with a very high retention. When we did it, when we became involved and turned the tables a bit,
Sure.
It ended up to be significantly less, mainly because we were able to explain in greater detail the true exposures and the preventions that were in place for this client.
Okay, good. So, we talked a lot about the specifics of a policy and how it's set up. Let's take a more of a macro level view about the industry itself. Where do you see it going? Where do you think it needs to go? Because by its very nature, this coverage is a very reactive coverage. The technology behind it is trying to catch up to a lot of these hackers and a lot of these methods that are being used to either to breach or gain access to companies' information. So with that reactive nature, the industry still always has to grow, it always has to change, and it always has to react to new types of threats. Where do you see it going, and where do you think that there are deficiencies that it needs to have more of a focal viewpoint to?
Well, the reason it's reactionary, it's not because the industry is per se slow. It's just that the rapid pace of technology
That's well said.
is just moving faster, right? So you don't know what you don't know.
Sure.
But they are in many ways creating products. If you looked at a cyber policy today as opposed to 5 years ago, it is significantly enhanced just in many areas, and just the basic languages coverages that they present. However, the insurance industry will respond and is responding based on the significant amount of data that they're collecting worldwide, so that they can price their products according to the type of industry that you're in. Also help with prevention and offering services in that area. Brokerage firms are becoming and having more expertise and line people that are very astute and all businesses are heightened to this exposure. All of that is creating a atmosphere where creativity is accepted, and an area where you can, if you can see things in a way, create language within a policy that's cutting edge and customized to your exposures. But you need to be able to either spend the time to do it, seek advice to help you, but it's there. Unfortunately, these threats and exposures are not going to go away.
They're constantly evolving.
They're going to evolve, and the best defense is to educate yourselves and your company for the loss prevention. The insurance clearly is an area for good professional advice, and the transfer of that exposure. The limits now can be much higher than they were before. They are picking up coverages that they hadn't, before, but you have to know how to ask for it, you have to know how to present it, and those are the areas where I think clients can become a bit more skilled at it, either hire the expertise or understand it a bit better. And the insurance industry is putting capital behind it to accept these larger exposures as they come. It's a very evolving area.
It is. And like we said before, no two policies are the same, and it's constantly changing. And one of the things that we always look for, especially when we first audit and review a policy, is the form that was on. You know, was it a 2014-15 form? Most coverages, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but because, as Tom has said, how constantly evolving this industry and the technology is, when you have a cybersecurity form that's already several years old, you may be in trouble, and you need to have a closer dive into it. So,
that all falls under the heading of getting the appropriate review and advice from internally or externally.
sure.
In the end, just to, I guess, tighten this up, it's not an exposure that anyone should fear, but it is an exposure that everyone has. If you have a computer, the likelihood is that you have information on there that you don't want shared, and the potential of that getting out has ramifications. It's the same for a business. Everything today, from the time we wake up, from our mobile phones, we are communicating in a digital era, and therefore, even more so in business, this translates to a higher level of security that every business is going to have to acknowledge and take on board, and the fines for not doing it with the new GDPR in Europe could be as high as 4% of your entire revenue. These things are significant, and protection is critical, and therefore, the industry, the insurance industry, and the consulting arm of which we provide advice on is available to help, and hopefully clients and business executives take advantage of that to the best of their abilities.
All right, great. And obviously we could talk about this for many, many more hours, but we're out of time for this segment. And I just wanted to thank you, Tom, for the insights that you have provided. And obviously, if there's anybody that's watching this that has questions or any concerns about their coverage or in getting coverage for cybersecurity, obviously we have information that's going to be posted with this video, and you can contact us anytime. We'd love to talk about it. Thank you.